I had always believed silence could be louder than any voice. That morning, inside the Suffolk County Courthouse, I realized just how deafening silence could be. It pressed against the walls, seeped into my skin, and made every heartbeat echo as if the whole world could hear it. I sat in the third row, hands folded over a plain folder that contained years of hidden truths, and I felt both invisible and terrifyingly exposed at once. The air smelled of polished wood, paper that had aged for decades, and faint perfume carried in by people who wanted to look important. Lawyers in dark suits shuffled their notes. Reporters whispered to each other while adjusting lenses on their cameras. Everyone was waiting for the drama they had come to witness, the collapse of the Lane family. My family. My mother walked into the courtroom first, heels striking the marble like she still believed she was walking a runway. Her coat was buttoned all the way up, but no amount of fabric could hide the tremor in her step. She held her chin high, as if pretending could turn fear into elegance. My father followed closely, his back stiff, his shoulders rigid as though carrying an invisible boulder. He always liked to present himself as unbreakable, the man who never bent. That day, I saw the cracks spiderwebbing beneath his skin, and then came my brother. Late, of course. He strolled in with sunglasses on, tapping at his phone, smirking as if the courtroom were a lounge where he was the guest of honor. He had the energy of a man who thought rules applied to everyone except himself. He looked like a boy playing dress-up, but the arrogance on his face made him believe he was a king. I watched them from behind, almost like a stranger. To them, I was still the daughter who worked in a coffee shop that doubled as a small bookstore. I was the girl who always smelled of old paper and ground beans, who drove a rusted car and wore clothes that no one bothered to compliment. I was invisible to their ambitions, too plain to belong to their world of illusions. If only they knew. The clerk announced the case and the room shifted. Chairs creaked as people sat straighter, pens hovered over notepads, cameras angled forward. The judge entered, robe flowing like a shadow, her presence commanding instant quiet. Judge Ellison. A woman known for being merciless with high society bankruptcies. Her gavel struck once, the sound reverberating in my chest like a drumbeat. Case number 4928. Defendants, the Lane family. My parents stiffened at the mention of our name. My brother smirked, still believing he could charm his way out of anything. I exhaled slowly. The clerk continued. Primary creditor, please confirm your presence. This was it. I rose from my seat. The scrape of the chair against the floor was louder than it had any right to be. Heads turned, whispers rippled through the room like a wave. I walked forward, each step deliberate, each step the culmination of years I had spent living in shadows. My mother turned first. Her mascara was carefully painted, but her eyes widened in shock, breaking the illusion of control. My father froze mid-breath, the color draining from his face. My brother lowered his phone, the smirk sliding right off his lips. Amira Lane, I said, my voice steady, carrying in the hush of the room. Legal representative of Whitmore Holdings, the company that currently holds all outstanding debts of the defendants. It was like throwing a stone into still water. Gasps broke out. Pens scratched furiously. Reporters exchanged looks of delight, their story suddenly 10 times better than expected. The silence returned, heavier, denser, until even the judge's gaze sharpened on me with interest. My mother whispered, barely audible but carried by desperation, Amira, what is this? My father stammered, I thought you worked at a coffee shop. My brother, for once in his life, was speechless. His phone slipped from his hand, clattering against the wooden floor like a gunshot. I met their eyes without flinching. I still do, I said softly. I love books, but that is not all I am. Judge Ellison adjusted her glasses, nodding slightly as if acknowledging that something remarkable was happening. Please continue, Miss Lane. I opened the folder in my hand. My fingers no longer trembled. Inside were documents I had reviewed 1,000 times, late at night, alone under the glow of a desk lamp. Mortgages, loan agreements, overlapping credit card statements. Contracts signed with the arrogance of people who never thought they would be held accountable. As I laid them out on the table, one by one, I spoke. Over the past 3 years, the defendants have refinanced their house 3 times, taken out 6 consumer loans from 5 institutions, and accumulated debts that far exceed their income. All lending entities have been acquired by Whitmore Holdings. My words were not theatrical, but they landed with the weight of stone. My mother's lips parted in disbelief. My father's jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. My brother looked around desperately, searching for someone to laugh with him, to tell him this was all a bad joke. There was no laughter. The silence after each statement was its own kind of judgment. I remembered every moment they had dismissed me. Every time my mother waved me off with a sigh, saying I would never understand real responsibility. Every time my father looked at me like I was a disappointment simply because I did not play the role he wrote for me. Every time my brother mocked me for still living in a small apartment above the bookstore. They had built their illusions brick by brick, and now I was dismantling them with papers and truth. Judge Ellison leaned forward. Miss Lane, are you suggesting that your family's entire financial collapse is under your control? I met her gaze without hesitation. Yes, Your Honor. For 3 years, I have managed every account. Every loan, every mortgage, every credit line now belongs to Whitmore Holdings under my authority. Gasps again. Reporters scribbled so quickly their pens nearly tore paper. Somewhere in the back, a camera clicked, the flash illuminating the stunned faces of my family. My mother's whisper cracked in the heavy air. How could you do this to us? You are my daughter. Her words hung there, trembling, as if motherhood alone were a shield against accountability. I looked at her calmly. You once told me I was no longer your daughter when I refused to give you my last savings. Do you remember that? The courtroom fell silent. My words landed like the strike of a bell, vibrating through stone and skin alike. My mother's face drained of color. My father's eyes darted away. My brother hunched lower in his seat, trying to vanish. I turned to the judge again. I did not come here to destroy anyone. I came to show the truth. And in that moment, standing in the center of the courtroom, I felt the line between who I had been and who I had become draw itself clearly. I was no longer the shadow behind the counter, the quiet daughter too plain to notice. I was the storm my grandmother had told me to be, but deep inside, beneath the calm, a whisper stirred. This was only the beginning. The gavel struck again, and the sound reverberated through my chest. Judge Ellison's voice carried no warmth, only clarity. The defendants will remain silent until called upon. Primary creditor, you may proceed. I breathed in slowly, letting the words anchor me. For years I had imagined this moment, pictured what it would feel like to stand not as the daughter they ignored, but as the woman who held their fate. Yet standing here, the sensation was not triumph. It was something sharper, colder, like holding a blade made of glass. I laid out the documents in careful order. Each sheet of paper was its own story, a fragment of recklessness, a chapter of denial. A mortgage approved for a house far beyond their means, a loan taken for a luxury car that had never truly been theirs. Credit cards maxed out on vacations, jewelry, endless dinners in places where the check was always higher than their dignity. I pointed to the numbers, each calculation precise. These debts were not accidents. They were choices. Choices repeated again and again until they piled into an avalanche. As I spoke, my mother's hand trembled against the table. She tried to sit upright, but her body betrayed her, shivering as if the truth itself had become a storm blowing against her skin. My father leaned back in his chair, his lips pressed tight, his eyes darting from document to document as if he could find an error, a loophole, anything that would make this reality untrue. My brother slouched, shoulders drawn up, hiding behind the curtain of his arrogance that was quickly thinning. I remembered nights when my mother told neighbors that I was the sweet but useless daughter. She would smile politely while explaining that I worked at a little bookstore cafe, as if that were the perfect anecdote to prove how small I was. They thought I was fragile, naive, someone who needed protection. They never saw the hours I spent balancing spreadsheets under a single lamp, the contracts signed under a pseudonym, the shell companies I created, each one a brick in the fortress my grandmother had prepared for me. I remembered my father's lectures, sharp and unforgiving. He told me once that real power belonged only to men who could hold the room with their voice. That women were better off supporting, not leading. That I should be grateful just to exist within the shadow of his ambition. But here he was, cornered by documents I placed on the table, unable to command even his own debt. And my brother, Logan, the family's shining star, the so-called genius who failed and failed again but was always forgiven. Every startup he touched turned to ash, yet my parents poured their savings into his illusions. I remembered the parties thrown in his honor, the toasts raised to his name while I stood in the corner, holding a glass I never drank from. That same brother now stared at the floor, face drained of color, his phone abandoned. The judge cleared her throat. Miss Lane, what is the total value of the debt under your control? $12,700,000, Your Honor. A gasp swept through the room. Even the reporters, seasoned in scandals, blinked in disbelief. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with horror. My father gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Logan whispered something under his breath that sounded like a prayer or a curse. The judge looked at me steadily. "And you are asserting that you alone, through Whitmore Holdings, acquired these debts?" "Yes, Your Honor. For 3 years I managed this acquisition quietly, legally, and with full authority." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but not in doubt. It was recognition. Perhaps she had seen many families fall in this courtroom, but rarely did she witness one of their own holding the rope that tightened around them. My mother broke the silence, her voice trembling. "Amira, you cannot mean this. We are your family. You cannot stand there and do this to us." I turned my gaze to her, letting my voice soften though my resolve remained steel. "Family is not defined by words, Mother. It is defined by actions. You made your choice the day you told me I was no longer your daughter. Do you remember?" Her eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. She looked away, as if denying my gaze could erase the memory. I closed the folder slowly. I did not need to scream or curse or throw blame across the room. The truth was already louder than anything else. For a moment, I let the silence stretch. I wanted them to feel the weight of every decision, every dismissal, every careless word. They had thought me invisible. They had thought I would never stand taller than the role they carved for me. But here I was, undeniable. I straightened my shoulders. "I did not come here to crush you," I said calmly. "I came here to show you the truth." The judge nodded, her expression unreadable but firm. "Very well. The record will reflect the statements provided." The session paused as documents were collected. Reporters leaned to one another, whispering, eyes darting between me and my family. Some smirked, others shook their heads in awe. I sat back down, heart still drumming, but calmer now. I let my gaze drift across the courtroom. The chandeliers above glowed faintly, casting shadows that stretched long across the polished wood. Every detail etched itself into my memory. The faint crack in the judge's bench, the way the clerk's pen scratched paper, the scent of perfume that lingered from a woman sitting nearby. And in that stillness, something inside me shifted. I realized that this day was not about revenge. It was not about humiliation. It was about stepping into the space I had been preparing for all along. 3 years of silence. 3 years of being underestimated. 3 years of hiding behind the mask of simplicity. All of it had led to this. I touched the edge of the folder with my fingertips, feeling the weight of the papers inside. But what pressed heavier on me was the weight of my grandmother's words, written in that shaky handwriting in the letter she had left. "Do not show them everything. Let them believe you are nothing, until the moment comes when the truth cannot be denied." This was that moment. I glanced again at my family. My mother's tears hung in her lashes, unshed but trembling. My father's jaw clenched, still searching for control in a world that no longer bent to him. My brother sat broken, his arrogance punctured by reality. And me, standing in the eye of the storm, unshaken. When the judge adjourned the session for recess, I stepped outside into the hallway. The cameras flashed instantly, voices shouting questions. "Miss Lane, how long have you been planning this? Did you betray your family for money? Are you the mysterious woman behind Whitmore Holdings?" I ignored them. Silence was still my weapon. I walked steadily down the corridor, my heels clicking against marble, echoing like a drumbeat. Each step carried me further from the girl they once dismissed and closer to the woman I had become. At the far end of the hallway, I stopped by a tall window. Outside, the winter sky stretched gray and endless. Snow flurries danced like restless whispers. I pressed my palm against the cold glass, exhaling slowly. For years, I had dreamed of the day when they would finally see me. But now that the moment had come, I understood something deeper. Recognition was not the victory. The real victory was knowing that I no longer needed it. I closed my eyes, hearing the echo of my grandmother's voice in memory. "True power is not how much you hold, Amira. It is knowing when to reveal it." And with that, I knew. The game had just begun. The day my grandmother was buried, I thought grief would be the only companion walking home with me. Funerals are strange things. They gather people who spend years pretending not to care about each other and force them into the same room, dressed in black, speaking in hushed voices as if lowering their tone could cover up the greed in their eyes. I sat quietly in the back row during the service. My mother wept with dramatic gasps that drew glances of sympathy from strangers. My father stood still, stiff like a statue carved from stone. My brother wandered around, shaking hands, whispering promises of future ventures to anyone who would listen. He was always the star, even in moments that did not belong to him. No one looked at me, and I preferred it that way. After the burial, relatives huddled together in the house, debating who would take the antique tea set, who would wear the diamond necklace, who deserved the carved furniture that had outlived 3 generations. They argued over objects as if they could inherit dignity through possessions. My mother's voice was the loudest. She wanted the necklace. My aunt wanted the furniture. No one asked if my grandmother had left words for her quiet granddaughter sitting in the corner. I slipped away unnoticed, the cold Vermont air biting my cheeks. Snow had begun to fall, soft and hesitant, as though the sky itself wanted to mourn without making too much noise. My car was parked at the edge of the driveway, a plain vehicle compared to the luxury cars lined up near the front. I opened the door and sat inside, letting the silence wrap around me. That was when I saw the envelope. It was a dark cream color, the edges worn, the handwriting shaky but unmistakable. My name was written across the front, Amira. I knew that handwriting. It belonged to the woman who once made me tea with exactly 3 sugar cubes every afternoon when I visited. The woman who wore worn slippers instead of designer shoes, who knitted sweaters that were too warm but never refused to fix them when the threads came loose. To the world she was eccentric, maybe even stingy. To me, she was something else. My hands trembled as I tore the seal. Inside was a letter and a stack of documents. The first line was enough to change the course of my life. If you are reading this, Amira, I am already gone. Do not cry for me. I do not need tears. I need you to be stronger and smarter than anyone in this family. I stopped breathing for a moment. The words blurred, then sharpened again as I blinked. She continued, do not let them know what you have. Do not tell your mother, your father, or your brother. They will not see you as family anymore. They will see you as a walking safe. Stay silent, watch carefully, and when the time is right, only then may you reveal what is yours. The documents that followed were thick, heavy with signatures and seals. Legal papers from a law firm I had never heard of. They confirmed what the letter hinted. I was the sole heir. Not my mother, not my father, not my brother, me. I read the numbers 3 times, trying to understand. 12 properties spread across 3 states, controlling shares in several investment companies. A portfolio worth $36 million. I closed my eyes, pressing the letter to my chest. My grandmother had always lived simply, in a wooden house that smelled of tea and old books. She had never shown the world who she really was. To everyone else, she was just an old woman with stubborn habits. But she had been one of the most powerful investors in Massachusetts decades earlier, a fact she had buried beneath the quiet of retirement. And she had chosen me. Why me? That was the question that rang in my head. My mother was older, the rightful daughter. My brother was the family's so-called genius. Even my father, though not related by blood, had always walked with entitlement as if the world owed him everything. But she had chosen none of them. She had chosen the invisible granddaughter, the one who made lattes for minimum wage, the one they all mocked as naive. My chest tightened. Part of me wanted to laugh. Only yesterday my mother had complained that all my grandmother left us was a pile of musty old books. That smell, she said, could never pay bills. She did not know that smell could now buy her entire neighborhood twice over. I leaned back in my seat, the snow tapping lightly on the windshield. For almost an hour I sat there, holding the papers, my heart racing. The world outside carried on, unaware that everything in my life had just been rewritten. The letter ended with one final sentence. True power is not in how much money you have, Amira. It is in when you choose to let others know you have it. Those words burned into me. They were not a gift. They were an instruction, a challenge. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it back into the envelope. My hand stopped shaking, replaced with something steadier. Resolve. I started the engine, the old car groaning like it always did. To the world, nothing had changed. I was still Amira, the quiet girl who worked at a bookstore cafe, still driving a car older than her brother's sunglasses. But inside, everything was different. As I drove away, the house where my relatives still fought over trinkets grew smaller in the rearview mirror. I wondered if they would ever understand that the real inheritance had already left with me. That night, in my tiny apartment above the bookstore, I laid the documents across my kitchen table. The hum of the old refrigerator filled the silence. The table shook slightly under the weight of what I had just inherited. I ran my fingers over the seals, the numbers, the letters that spelled out my name beside the word heir. I whispered it to myself, sole heir. The words felt unreal, like lines from a storybook, but this was no fairy tale. This was war disguised as family, and my grandmother had armed me before she left. I poured myself a cup of tea, the cheap kind that came in a box of 20 bags. I stirred in 3 sugar cubes. For the first time, I understood why she had always insisted on that number. It was her way of leaving me a code. A reminder that strength is found in patterns, in discipline, in choosing consistency, even when the world mocks you for it. The steam curled around my face as I stared at the papers. I could not tell anyone. Not my mother, who would spend every cent trying to climb into circles that did not want her. Not my father, who believed power was his birthright. Not my brother, who would burn the fortune chasing an illusion of genius. It was mine, and for now it had to remain a secret. But secrets are heavy things. They do not sit quietly. They grow, pressing against your chest, demanding release. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, my grandmother's words echoing. Do not tell them. Wait, choose the right moment. I did not know when that moment would come. All I knew was that when it did, it would change everything. And until then, I would live two lives. The first week after the funeral felt like living in a dream that no one else could see. By day, nothing had changed. I still unlocked the bookstore cafe at 8 every morning, still turned on the squeaky coffee machine that hissed like an old kettle, still arranged the new arrivals on dusty shelves, and smiled at customers who asked for novels they had no intention of finishing. To anyone watching, I was the same quiet girl, ordinary to the point of invisibility. But at night, when the store lights dimmed and the city outside fell quiet, my life split open. I spread the inheritance papers across my tiny desk and traced the outlines of what I now owned. It felt unreal. 12 properties, 3 investment companies, portfolios stretching from Boston to Seattle. Numbers danced on the page, commas separating millions from millions. I would sit back in my chair, cup of tea in hand, and whisper the sums out loud just to hear them in the air. It never sounded real. Yet every document bore my name. Every legal seal told me this was no illusion. I thought about my grandmother constantly. How had she managed to keep all of this hidden for so long? The neighbors saw her as a quaint old woman with stubborn habits. My mother saw her as stingy, almost cruel for never giving money even when asked. No one, not even my ambitious father, had suspected she was sitting on a fortune large enough to tilt the scales of power. And still, she chose silence. I remembered her sitting at the wooden table, pouring tea with her steady hand, always dropping exactly 3 sugar cubes. She never explained why. She never had to. It was her ritual, her way of reminding me that strength came from patterns, from quiet control, from the discipline of never revealing too much too soon. That memory kept me anchored as I began my double life. During the day, my mother would call me with her usual sighs. She complained about bills, about gas prices, about how difficult life had become. Then, without pause, she would add, "Amira, have you saved anything? Logan needs a new laptop. It would help his next startup." I always answered the same way. "Not yet, mother. I barely make enough to cover rent." She would sigh again, then turn to praising Logan, her voice lifting with pride whenever she spoke his name. "Logan is the future," she would say. "He just needs a little more time." I would smile quietly, though she could not see it, because I already knew his last startup had failed 6 months ago, swallowed by bankruptcy that my holding company had quietly acquired. He thought he was chasing innovation. He never realized I was watching every step, tracking every debt, waiting. The strangest part was how easy it was to stay invisible. People want to believe the story they have already written about you. My family had cast me as the weak one, the simple girl with no ambition. They wore that belief like blindfolds, so even when I stood right in front of them, they could not see the truth. I leaned into the role. I wore plain clothes, I drove my old car, I kept my job at the bookstore cafe. Customers saw me as sweet and harmless. My parents saw me as a disappointment they had to tolerate. Logan saw me as background noise in the drama of his own life. And I let them, because silence was power. Every night I studied the accounts, the reports, the markets. My grandmother had left me not just wealth but a system. Hidden trusts, shell companies, layers of protection that made it impossible for anyone to trace the fortune back to me. It was a fortress disguised as nothing more than faded paper and dusty ledgers. I built upon it. Slowly, carefully. I reinvested dividends, shifted portfolios, acquired small companies that looked insignificant on the surface but held valuable ground. I signed contracts under names that sounded old-fashioned enough to be ignored. No one questioned them. No one questioned me. The secret grew heavier with time, pressing against my chest like a stone I carried everywhere. Some nights, lying in bed, I wanted to tell someone, to say out loud, "I am not who you think I am." But each time I imagined it, I saw my grandmother's handwriting. "Do not tell them. Wait, choose the right moment." So I waited. I learned to live with the wait. I still remember one evening, about a month after the funeral. Logan came to the bookstore cafe, leaning on the counter with his usual smugness. He wore a leather jacket too expensive for someone with no steady income, and his sunglasses hung loosely around his neck. He looked around the cafe with disdain, wrinkling his nose. "This place smells like old paper and stale coffee," he said, as though insulting it would make him feel larger. I smiled. "Very therapeutic," I answered. He smirked. "You will see, my next project will be big, billion-dollar big. I am already talking to investors." I nodded, pouring a latte for another customer. I did not tell him that the very investors he was chasing had already rejected his pitch. I knew because I was the controlling shareholder in the firm that rejected him. The irony tasted sweeter than any coffee. That night, I sat at my desk again, looking at the papers, the numbers, the letter. I thought about what it meant to live two lives. By day, invisible. By night, untouchable. At first, I thought I was only protecting myself. But slowly, I began to realize I was also preparing for something else. A reckoning. Because if there is one thing my grandmother had taught me, it was this: truth, when revealed at the right moment, is more powerful than any lie carried for a lifetime. I traced her final line again with my fingertip. True power is not in how much money you have, Amira. It is in when you choose to let others know you have it. I whispered it to the dark room, and I knew deep inside that one day I would choose, not yet, but soon. Living two lives is easier than most people think. You would imagine it takes clever disguises, secret passwords, hidden doors, but the truth is simpler, almost disappointingly so. People see what they want to see, and once they have written you into a small box, they rarely look outside of it. By morning, I was the girl behind the counter of a coffee bookstore. My apron smelled of roasted beans, my hands carried the faint dust of paperbacks. I smiled at customers who asked for Hemingway and never read past the first chapter. I refilled sugar jars, wiped down tables, scribbled inventory notes in the margins of a notebook that looked far too ordinary to hold anything valuable. My colleagues saw me as dependable, quiet, maybe even timid. Customers saw me as sweet. My family saw me as nothing. By night, I sat in a different world. In my upstairs apartment, I pushed the couch against the wall to make room for a desk where contracts waited. My laptop lit the small room, its glow turning stacks of papers into silver towers. On one screen, I reviewed reports from a financial firm in New York. On another, I watched property values rise and fall across Boston. Bank transfers, acquisitions, investment portfolios, all under my control, all moving in the rhythm I chose. It was a strange duality. One moment I was arguing with a supplier about the price of coffee beans, the next I was approving a 7-figure transaction that would quietly change the ownership of a building in Chicago. No one ever suspected a thing. And that, I learned, was the most powerful weapon of all. Silence. The bookstore had its own kind of charm. It was tucked between a laundromat and a florist, its windows always a little fogged, its sign chipped at the corners. To outsiders, it looked fragile, like it could vanish any day. But to me, it was the perfect stage for invisibility. Customers thought of it as a quaint escape from the rush of the city. My family thought of it as proof of my mediocrity. I let them. One evening, my mother dropped by unannounced. She wrinkled her nose at the smell of old pages, her eyes scanning the shelves with distaste. "This place is suffocating," she said, brushing dust from her sleeve. "Why do you waste your life here?" I smiled politely. "Because I like it." She sighed the way she always did when she thought I was hopeless. "You should learn from Logan. He is on the brink of something great." I nodded, though I knew the truth. Logan's last pitch had been laughed out of a boardroom. I had seen the reports. I had even read the rejection letter, signed by executives who had no idea I was their silent majority shareholder. Later that night, alone again, I laughed softly to myself. Not in cruelty, but in disbelief at how blind they chose to be. My grandmother had been right. When people believe you are nothing, they never see you coming. But invisibility was not always easy. There were nights when the weight of silence pressed heavy. I would look at my reflection in the dark window and wonder which life was truly mine. Was I the girl who smelled of coffee and books, or the woman who could move millions with a keystroke? Could I be both, or was I destined to lose one when the truth finally demanded to be seen? It was during one of those nights, as I sat hunched over my desk, that I felt it, the first crack in the fortress of my secret. I had left a folder open on the table, its pages fanned out like a deck of cards. Exhaustion had dulled my caution. I went to the kitchen to pour tea, and when I returned, the papers had shifted. Barely an inch, but not the way I had left them. I froze. It took me a moment to realize what had happened. My father had stopped by earlier that day, dropping off a box of old family photos he insisted I keep. He had lingered longer than usual, his eyes scanning the apartment as if searching for something. I remembered now the way his gaze had flicked toward the desk, the faint hesitation before he left. Had he seen? The thought sent a chill through me. I stacked the papers neatly, slid them back into their folder, and locked them in the drawer. My heart beat too loudly in the quiet room. For the first time since inheriting my grandmother's fortune, I wondered if I had been careless. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Every hum of the refrigerator felt like a warning. My grandmother's words echoed louder than ever. Do not let them know. I wanted to believe my father had noticed nothing, that it was paranoia, exhaustion, imagination, but a seed of doubt had been planted, and like all seeds, it would grow. From then on, I became even more careful. I double-checked locks. I closed my laptop when anyone visited. I stopped leaving documents on the desk. I kept my mask tighter during the day, my smile more convincing, my words more harmless. Yet beneath the surface, the unease lingered. It was the first hint that my silence might not last forever. Living two lives sounds glamorous when whispered in stories. In reality, it is exhausting. I learned to measure every word, every step, every glance. A smile at the cafe was never just a smile, it was camouflage. A pause in conversation was never just silence, it was a calculation of what I could reveal and what I must bury. During the day, my mother called often. She spoke of Logan's brilliance, how investors would soon recognize his genius. She spoke of her sacrifices, how she endured sleepless nights worrying about the family. She never asked about me. At most, she used my life as contrast. Amira works at that little bookstore, she told her friends, her tone dripping with pity. Sweet, but no ambition. They nodded, of course. People always nodded when a story fit their expectations. I became their portrait of mediocrity, and they admired themselves for tolerating me. But at night, my apartment transformed into a war room. The small desk became a battlefield where I balanced ledgers and contracts. My laptop glowed with numbers from markets I had learned to navigate like tides. I sent instructions to lawyers who knew my name only through encrypted email. I read reports from managers who never imagined their mysterious client was a young woman living above a bookstore cafe. The duality was strange. 1 hour I was steaming milk for a cappuccino, the next I was approving the acquisition of a commercial building in Boston. To the world, I was fragile. In the shadows, I was formidable. It might have stayed that way, safe and steady, if not for small moments that betrayed cracks in the silence. One evening, I returned from work and found the door to my apartment slightly ajar. My breath caught. I remembered locking it. Inside, everything looked untouched. The books were stacked where I had left them, the desk still cluttered with papers. But the air felt different, as if someone had been there and left only minutes before. I checked the drawer where I kept my grandmother's letter and the inheritance documents. They were still there, tucked away, but the position had shifted slightly, or maybe it was my imagination. Paranoia grew teeth in moments like that. That week, my father visited again. He asked casual questions, but his eyes wandered the apartment with too much interest. He commented on the sturdiness of the desk, the quality of the lock on the drawer, things he had never noticed before. He left with a smile that looked like politeness, but I saw something else flicker behind it. Suspicion. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. If he suspected me, what would he do? Would he confront me directly? Or worse, would he search quietly, the way men like him believed they were entitled to? The thought unsettled me, but it also sharpened my focus. From then on, I played the role of invisibility with even greater precision. At the bookstore cafe, I exaggerated my smallness. I laughed at my own mistakes, shrugged when people teased me, let my colleagues believe I was fragile. I let my family think I was hopeless. The more I leaned into their illusion, the safer my truth became. Yet inside, I tightened my grip on the empire my grandmother had left. I set stricter security protocols, rerouted communications, created new shell companies. I became not just the heir of her fortune, but its guardian. Still, the seed of doubt remained. One night, as I walked home from the store, I felt it again. A shadow across the street, footsteps that echoed a fraction too long behind mine. When I turned, the sidewalk was empty. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps it was everything. I closed the door behind me, heart racing, and leaned against it in the dark. My grandmother's words echoed again. Do not let them know. It was advice. It was warning. It was prophecy. I did not know who had been watching me or how much they had seen. But I knew this. Silence was no longer just my weapon. It was my shield. And one day soon it would be tested. Decline never arrives like an earthquake. It does not shake the walls or crack the ground in a single violent moment. It comes slowly, almost politely, knocking on the door with little inconveniences until you realize the entire house is hollow. I watched the decline of my family unfold with the patience of a gardener. At first it was small things, details no one else seemed to notice. My mother replaced imported wine at dinner parties with cheaper bottles, but she covered the labels with decorative sleeves to disguise them. The chandelier in the dining room flickered for weeks before being repaired, something she would never have tolerated before. And she no longer wore her signature pearl necklace. In its place was a gold-plated chain, tarnished at the edges. To anyone else, these were insignificant shifts. To me, they were signals. Quiet alarms. The empire of illusions was beginning to crumble. Logan, of course, noticed nothing. He lived as if the world bent to his imagination. He boasted of apps that would change the future, platforms that would revolutionize industries, inventions that existed only in his words. Each time, my parents clung to his promises with desperate devotion, pouring money they did not have into dreams that were never real. I sat in silence, sipping tea, nodding at their stories, while my laptop upstairs displayed the truth. Reports of loans approved under my control, notices of debt accumulating like snowdrifts. Every month the numbers deepened. They thought they were maneuvering freely. They never realized the rope tightening around them had been in my hands all along. The strange thing was that I felt no thrill in it. I did not smile when I saw the debts stack higher. I did not laugh when my brother flaunted money he did not own. Instead, I felt a heaviness. As if I were carrying their choices in my own chest, waiting for the day when weight would crush them. But I reminded myself of my grandmother's words. True power is not in possession. It is in timing, so I waited. One winter evening, I visited my parents' house. Snow clung to the walkway, unshoveled. My father had always hired a service for such chores. Now the snow lay thick, and I nearly slipped climbing the icy steps. Inside, the living room looked different. The Persian rug had vanished. The Italian leather sofa was gone, replaced with a cheaper imitation. My mother greeted me with a smile too bright, one that cracked as soon as she turned her head. "We let the staff go," she said lightly. "Times are difficult. Everyone is tightening their belts." I nodded, saying nothing, but I knew there was no new crisis sweeping the world. The only crisis was theirs, a debt shadow stretching longer by the day. That night, Logan stormed into the house mid-conversation, waving a brochure for his newest idea. An app for pet owners, he explained, a revolutionary system using scent sensors to let cats choose their own meals. He spoke with wild enthusiasm, gesturing grandly as though unveiling the next great invention of mankind. My parents clapped and cheered, eyes shining with pride. I watched quietly from the corner, my hands folded. They did not notice the irony. Only a week earlier, I had signed a report from one of my companies rejecting Logan's pitch for funding, dismissing it as unrealistic and financially unsound. But to my parents, he was still the savior. They looked at me with disappointment, as if my plain sweater and modest car were failures compared to his empty brilliance. "You should learn from your brother," my mother said. "He takes risks. He dreams big." I only smiled, because I already knew the truth. Upstairs that night, I reviewed another report. It detailed the refinancing of their home again. They had mortgaged it for the third time in 2 years. The loan had been approved under one of my shell companies. Without realizing it, they had borrowed from me. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I could have denied the loan. I could have saved them from themselves, but I didn't, because this was not about revenge. This was about truth, and sometimes truth only blooms when illusions collapse. I remembered my grandmother's voice, softer now, like memory fading into echo. "Let them underestimate you. Let them believe you are nothing. Only then will they reveal who they truly are." I was beginning to see it clearly. My family's love was not unconditional. It was built on illusions, on the hope that Logan would carry them higher. They had never believed in me. And now, as the walls cracked, they still refused to look my way. But the day would come when they would have no choice, and I would be ready. Decline deepens quietly until suddenly it cannot be hidden anymore. I began to notice it in the way my father spoke. He had always been a man of control, his voice sharp and commanding, every word chosen like a general leading an army. But lately, his sentences carried hesitation. He paused more often, searching for the right phrase, filling the silence with meaningless words. When bills arrived in thick envelopes, he no longer tossed them aside with casual arrogance. Instead, he held them longer, his thumb pressed against the seal, as if waiting for courage to open what he already feared. My mother tried to disguise the truth with vanity. She wore bright scarves to distract from the fact that her dresses were no longer new. She painted her lips crimson to cover the tremble of her mouth. She hosted dinner parties with cheaper food but dressed the table with elaborate flowers, hoping guests would not notice the difference. They noticed. People always do. They whispered when they thought she could not hear, their eyes darting around the shrinking luxury of the house. And Logan, he remained the same. Loud, confident, endlessly reckless. He announced new ventures weekly, as if ideas alone could conjure money. He borrowed from friends, then strangers, then whoever was gullible enough to believe his charm. When those wells dried up, he borrowed from my parents, draining what little they had left. I knew because I was the lender behind every shadowed loan. They thought anonymous companies had saved them, that fortune had smiled in their darkest hour. But it was me, always me. Some nights I stared at the spreadsheets with a bitterness I could not shake. I could have stopped it. I could have cut them off, forced them to face reality before the collapse became catastrophic. But part of me wanted to see how far they would go, how blind their devotion to illusion could become. It was not revenge, I told myself. It was proof. One evening, my mother called me in tears. Her voice cracked as she confessed that the bank was threatening foreclosure if payments were missed again. She asked if I could lend her anything, even a few thousand, just until Logan's next deal came through. I almost laughed. She believed Logan's lies more fiercely than she had ever believed in me. I whispered into the phone, "I am sorry, Mother. I have nothing." She cried harder, her sobs echoing in my ear until she hung up. I sat in the dark afterward, the letter from my grandmother beside me on the desk. Do not show them everything. Wait, choose the right moment. Was this the moment? I closed my eyes, not yet. The decline steepened quickly after that. Creditors called daily. The house lost its shine, the walls whispering with neglect. Repairs were postponed, then abandoned. Guests stopped coming. The laughter that once filled the halls faded into silence, replaced by arguments and slammed doors. My father began drinking more. I saw the empty bottles lined discreetly in the garage. My mother grew restless, pacing rooms as if searching for a past she could not resurrect. Logan became defensive, lashing out whenever anyone questioned his endless failures. And me, I kept watching. Each night I balanced their debts, deciding whether to approve another extension or let the pressure build. It felt like holding their lives in my palm, squeezing lightly, testing how much they could endure before shattering. But watching their fall was not satisfying. It was hollow. I found myself pacing my own apartment, asking questions that had no easy answers. Was I cruel for letting them suffer, or was I merciful for giving them rope instead of cutting them off completely? Was I saving them from a greater collapse by letting them taste the bitterness now? I did not know. What I did know was that every step of their decline brought me closer to the moment my grandmother had spoken of. The reckoning, the unveiling. One winter night, as snow piled against the window, I dreamed of her. She stood in her old slippers, pouring tea, dropping 3 sugar cubes into the cup. She looked at me with eyes that saw everything. "You cannot save them from themselves," she whispered, "but you can show them the truth." I woke with the taste of her words lingering like sugar on my tongue. The next morning, I looked out at the city and realized something. Their decline was no longer a quiet slope. It was a cliff. And they were already falling. It was only a matter of when, not if, the world would know. And when that day came, I would no longer be invisible. The day of confrontation did not feel like war. It felt like inevitability. When I entered the courthouse that morning, the winter air clung to me like frost, sharp against my skin. Reporters crowded the steps, their voices a storm of questions. I walked through them without a word. Silence had always been my armor, and I would not abandon it now. Inside, the courtroom hummed with anticipation. Everyone knew something would break today. My parents sat at the defense table, pale and stiff. My mother's makeup could not hide the tremor in her lips. My father stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Logan fidgeted, tapping his foot nervously though he tried to mask it with false confidence. I took my seat at the creditor's table, the folder of documents once again before me. My hands did not shake. They had stopped trembling long ago. The judge entered, gavel striking. Case 4928, Lane family bankruptcy hearing. The room hushed. I stood, my voice steady. "Your Honor, I represent Whitmore Holdings, the entity that has acquired all outstanding debts of the defendants. As controlling creditor, I am here to present terms of resolution." My mother gasped softly, the sound cracking like porcelain. My father's face twitched. Logan muttered something under his breath, but his words died when the judge raised her eyes. "Proceed, Miss Lane," Judge Ellison said. I opened the folder. Years of silence, of invisibility, of being dismissed had led to this moment. I thought of my grandmother's letter. Choose the right moment. This was it. "The Lane family has accumulated debts totaling over $12 million, I began. These debts have been consolidated under Whitmore Holdings. As primary creditor, I have the authority to demand repayment or foreclose on all properties. The words hung heavy, pressing against the walls. I let the silence linger before continuing. However, I am not here to strip them of everything. I am here to give them conditions. If they accept, repayment will be adjusted, foreclosure postponed. If they refuse, the law will take its course. All eyes locked on me. My mother's lips parted in disbelief. My father leaned forward, fists clenched. Logan looked between us, confusion etched on his face. 3 conditions, I said clearly. First, Logan must secure steady employment within 90 days. Not as a founder of imaginary companies, not as a visionary chasing shadows, but as an employee. He will work under someone else's authority, earn a paycheck, and prove that he can sustain himself without draining the family. Logan's face flushed red. His mouth opened to protest, but the judge silenced him with a glance. Second, my parents must live within a strict budget. All unnecessary luxuries are to be sold, including the house in which they currently reside. They will move into a smaller property, one proportionate to their income. My mother shook her head furiously, whispering no, 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 as if denial could change the words. Third, all financial decisions moving forward will be overseen by a trustee appointed by Whitmore Holdings. In plain terms, they will no longer control their own money. Every purchase, every loan, every investment will require approval. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Reporters scribbled frantically. Cameras clicked. I stood silent, letting the weight of the conditions settle. My father finally spoke, his voice trembling with anger. You cannot do this. You are our daughter. I met his gaze, unflinching. I am the creditor, father. And these are the terms. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Please, Amira, this is cruelty. Cruelty, I repeated softly. Was it cruelty when you told me I was worthless? Was it cruelty when you invested every cent in Logan and left me scraping by? Was it cruelty when you said I would never be more than a girl behind a counter? She bowed her head, the weight of memory crushing her. The judge's gavel struck once. Order, I took a breath. I did not shout. I did not raise my voice. I simply spoke the truth. These conditions are not punishment. They are survival. Accept them and there will be a future. Refuse them and everything ends here. Silence fell. My family sat frozen, broken in their pride. I could see the storm in their eyes, rage, denial, fear. But beneath it all, I saw something else beginning to take root. The faint, painful flicker of recognition. They had no choice. And for the first time, they knew it. For a long moment, no one spoke. The conditions hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. I stood at the creditor's table, my documents spread neatly before me, while my family stared as though I had turned into a stranger. My father was the first to break the silence. His fists slammed against the table with a force that startled even the clerk. His voice thundered through the room. This is madness. We are the Lane family. We do not beg, we do not obey. I looked at him calmly. You borrowed. You spent. You mortgaged your pride for credit cards and empty ventures. Now you will face what you chose. His mouth opened again, but the judge raised a hand. Mr. Lane, you will not disrupt this hearing. My father sank back into his seat, but the fury did not leave his eyes. My mother leaned forward, her voice breaking. Amira, you cannot humiliate us like this. We are your blood. We gave you everything. Everything, I repeated quietly. Did you? Or did you give Logan everything while leaving me nothing but silence? Her painted lips trembled. She looked down at her hands, the rings she once flaunted now dull and scratched. She whispered something I could not hear, maybe a prayer, maybe regret. Logan finally burst, his voice sharp with disbelief. You are insane. You want me to work for someone else? Do you know who I am? Do you know what I am capable of? I met his glare without blinking. Yes, I know exactly what you are capable of. Failure, repeated failure, funded by everyone but you. His face turned crimson, his words choking in his throat. He looked around for support, for someone to applaud his bravado. No one did, not even my parents. The courtroom had turned against him. Reporters scribbled, cameras clicked, every eye watching the unraveling of a golden boy. The judge cleared her throat. Miss Lane, do you require formal acceptance of these conditions? Yes, Your Honor, they must sign within 7 days. And if they do not, then Whitmore Holdings will proceed with foreclosure. The gavel struck once, final. The terms are on record. The session ended, but the echoes remained. My family sat in stunned silence, their world collapsing around them. I gathered my papers slowly, deliberately, letting the sound of each page sliding into the folder remind them this was real. As I turned to leave, my mother called out, her voice cracking. Amira, please, we can change, we can fix this. I paused at the doorway, my back to them. Change, I said softly, is no longer a choice. It is survival. And then I walked away. Outside the courthouse, the cold air rushed against me, sharp and clean. Reporters swarmed, their questions flying like arrows. How long had I been planning this? Was I driven by revenge? What would happen to my family now? I ignored them. Silence was still my weapon. I climbed into the waiting car, the leather seat cold beneath me. For a moment, I closed my eyes. The adrenaline drained, leaving me heavy, almost hollow. This was not victory. It was necessity. I thought of my grandmother's letter again, the ink faded but the words sharp as ever. Do not tell them. Wait, choose the right moment. I had chosen. Yet as the car pulled away, I felt a strange ache. Watching them break had not brought the satisfaction I once imagined. It only left me with questions. Had I gone too far, or not far enough? Was I saving them from ruin or pushing them deeper into it? The city blurred past the window. Lights flickered, streets buzzed, life carried on indifferent to the storm I had unleashed. In the glass reflection, I saw myself, not the barista in a bookstore cafe, not the invisible daughter, but the woman who now held her family's future in her hands, and I realized something that tightened my chest. This was only the surface. The real test was yet to come, because controlling their debts was one thing, controlling what they became after losing everything, that was another battle entirely. And deep down, I feared I had only lit the first spark. At first, I thought my family would reject the conditions. They left the courthouse with fury still burning in their eyes, my mother clutching her coat like armor, my father walking like a man condemned, Logan muttering curses under his breath. I expected them to fight, to scheme, to resist until the very end. But reality is a patient teacher, and humiliation is sharper than any blade. Within weeks, the walls of their illusions began to crumble. My father, once the voice of authority in every room, now stood in line at a construction firm, handing over resumes to men half his age. My mother, who once hosted charity luncheons and bragged about imported pearls, now clipped coupons in the grocery aisle, her cart filled with generic brands. And Logan, the self-proclaimed genius, found himself working at an electronics store, selling phones he used to throw away after a season. I watched it all unfold from a distance. Sometimes I wondered if this was cruelty. To see them stripped of the masks they had worn so proudly, to witness their arrogance dissolve into resignation. Yet another part of me thought it was necessary. They had built their lives on illusions, and illusions had to be shattered before truth could take root. But change did not come easily. One evening, my mother called me. Her voice was small, brittle. She said she could not sleep on the mattress in the new house, that it hurt her back, that she missed the silk sheets she once owned. I listened quietly, letting her words spill out. She wanted sympathy. I gave her silence. Another time, my father confronted me, his eyes red, his pride wounded. "Do you enjoy this?" he asked. Watching us suffer, I stared at him, my voice calm. "I do not enjoy it, but I will not stop it." Logan was the loudest. He hated his new job, hated the uniform, hated being told what to do. He called me one night, drunk and raging, saying I had ruined his future, that I had killed his genius. I let him shout until his voice broke, then I hung up. In their eyes, I was cruel, but in truth, I was holding up a mirror. They were only seeing themselves for the first time. Still, something inside me twisted. Watching them break did not bring the satisfaction I imagined. Instead, it left me restless. I walked the city streets at night, listening to the hum of traffic, asking questions I could not answer. Was this the justice my grandmother wanted, or was I only repeating their cruelty in another form? It was during one of those nights that the twist came. A letter arrived at my apartment. Not the old, yellowed kind my grandmother had left, but a crisp envelope with a law firm's seal. I opened it slowly, my breath caught in my throat. Inside was a document I had never seen before. An addendum to my grandmother's will, locked until certain conditions were met. My hands trembled as I read. The heir, Amira Lane, is entrusted with the estate on one condition. She must ensure the preservation, not the destruction, of the Lane family. Should the family collapse entirely, the estate shall be dissolved and transferred in its entirety to charitable foundations. I read it again, then again. My heart pounded louder with every word. The fortune was never truly mine. It was a trial. A responsibility, a burden disguised as a gift. If my family failed completely, if they shattered beyond repair, then everything I had inherited would vanish. Not only would I lose the empire I had built, but my grandmother's legacy would pass to strangers. The room spun. I sat down hard, the paper trembling in my hands. All this time, I believed I was delivering justice, that by forcing them into collapse, I was showing them the truth. But now I understood. The truth was not the end. The truth was the test. I thought of my grandmother again, her quiet eyes watching me across the table, her 3 sugar cubes falling into tea with steady grace. She had not chosen me because she wanted revenge on the family. She had chosen me because she believed I could do what no one else would, lead them back from the brink. It felt impossible. They had never respected me. They had dismissed me, humiliated me, ignored me. And now I had to save them. I pressed the paper against my chest, my breath ragged. The question no longer was whether they would survive. The question was whether I was strong enough to make sure they did. The document lay open on my desk, its black ink glowing under the lamplight as though mocking me. For hours I read the words over and over, hoping I had misunderstood. But each line was clear, sharp, undeniable. My grandmother had not simply given me her fortune. She had given me a challenge. The estate is yours, Amira, if you prove yourself capable of preserving the Lane family. Preserving, not destroying. I leaned back in my chair, my heart hammering. For months I had believed I was the storm, the reckoning, the consequence they never saw coming. I had stood in the courtroom, delivered conditions with steel in my voice, and thought I had already fulfilled her instructions. But this was different. It was not enough to break them. I had to rebuild them. I closed my eyes, pressing my palms against my face. Memories flooded me. My mother's laughter at dinner parties, sharp and rehearsed. My father's lectures, heavy with disdain. Logan's mocking grin, always comparing, always belittling. For years, I had been invisible to them, and now I was expected to be their savior. I whispered aloud, almost bitterly. Why me, grandmother? Why give me this burden? The room stayed silent. Only the hum of the refrigerator answered. But in the silence, I thought of her voice. Strong, steady, the way she had always been when others underestimated her. You can carry it, Amira, that is why. The days that followed felt heavier than any before. I visited my parents' new, modest house, the one they hated but could no longer deny. My mother was folding laundry at the kitchen table, her manicured nails chipped, her eyes tired. She looked up at me with something I had never seen before, shame. Amira, she whispered. I do not know how to live like this. I wanted to tell her it was her own doing, that she had chosen illusion over reality for decades. But the letter burned in my mind. Preserve them, save them. Instead, I pulled out a notebook. Then learn, I will show you. Her eyes widened, stunned that I was offering something other than condemnation. My father resisted more fiercely. He came to me one evening, his pride wounded, his voice shaking. You think because you control the money, you control us. But you will never control me. I handed him the document, the sealed addendum to the will. His hands trembled as he read, his face drained of color. For the first time, the mighty patriarch looked small, so it was always her test, he muttered. Always her game. Not a game, I corrected softly. A chance. Logan was the hardest. He despised his job, his uniform, the customers who ignored his charm. He called me one night, voice raw. Do you enjoy watching me suffer? Is this what you always wanted? I almost told him yes, that I had wanted him to taste humility for once in his life. But the letter pressed against my heart like a reminder. Preserve, rebuild, I swallowed my pride. No, Logan, I want you to grow. He laughed bitterly. You think I am weak, I answered quietly. I think you're lost. Silence stretched between us before he hung up. That night, I sat again at my desk, staring at the glowing city outside my window. My grandmother's words echoed louder than ever. True power is not in how much money you have. It is in when you choose to reveal it. I thought I had revealed it in the courtroom, standing tall, letting the world see me at last. But perhaps that was only the first step. Perhaps the real revelation was not power at all, but mercy. The idea unsettled me. Mercy had never been part of my vocabulary, but maybe that was the final twist, that my grandmother had not chosen me to punish them. She had chosen me to heal what they had broken. I looked again at the papers, the fortune balanced on the edge of condition. If they collapsed entirely, I would lose everything. But if I could guide them, if I could turn humiliation into humility, then both the family and the legacy would survive. The thought frightened me more than any courtroom battle, because money was easy to control. People were not. Yet for the first time, I felt something different stirring inside me. Not anger, not vengeance. Something softer, quieter, but far more dangerous. Responsibility. I whispered into the empty room as if my grandmother could still hear me. I will try. The lamp flickered once, then steadied. I chose to believe it was her answer, and in that moment I understood. This was not the end of the storm, it was the eye. The real trial was only beginning. Years passed more slowly than I expected. Change is never sudden, never clean. It is a process of breaking, resisting, stumbling, and finally learning to walk again. My parents struggled the most. The first months in the smaller house were filled with silence. My mother refused to hang curtains because she said they would never be as fine as the silk ones she lost. My father refused to mow the lawn, insisting such work was beneath him. But bills piled up, neighbors whispered, and slowly, pride gave way to necessity. I watched them learn what it meant to live without the illusion of wealth. My mother began cooking simple meals, no longer dishes designed to impress but food that filled and warmed. She cried the first time she bought groceries with a budget card, ashamed of what she had become. Yet over time, her shame turned into something else, humility. She began to smile at the cashier, to thank the stock boys who carried heavy bags. It was awkward at first, but genuine. My father was harder to bend. He worked construction for months, his body aching, his pride shattered. He hated every minute of it. But then, one evening, he told me something unexpected. He said that when he came home sore and tired, he felt something he hadn't felt in decades. He felt real. Logan fought the longest. He despised his job at the electronics store. He mocked the uniform, mocked his manager, mocked the customers. He nearly quit a dozen times. But one night, I visited unannounced. I saw him kneeling beside an old man, showing him how to transfer contacts from one phone to another. Logan was patient, careful, even kind. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something quieter. When he looked up and saw me watching, he flushed with embarrassment. But I smiled, and for once he did not sneer back. The transformation was not perfect. They stumbled often. My mother relapsed into old habits, buying a dress she could not afford. My father cursed the humiliation of manual labor. Logan still boasted of projects he would never start, but each mistake was followed by a moment of awareness, of correction. Slowly, painfully, they were learning, and I was learning too. At first, I believed my grandmother's challenge was a punishment, but the longer I lived with it, the more I realized it was a gift. She had forced me to confront not only their illusions, but my own bitterness. It was not enough to be strong in silence. True strength was guiding others out of their weakness. I often returned to the little bookstore cafe, the place where my two lives had once overlapped. The scent of paper and coffee grounded me. Sometimes, after hours, I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker and thought about the girl I had been. Invisible, small, forgotten. She was gone now. In her place was someone who had carried a family through collapse, who had turned humiliation into growth. And yet, I did not feel triumphant. I felt peaceful. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the city gold, I brewed tea the way my grandmother had taught me. I dropped 3 sugar cubes, watching them sink. My mother sat across from me, her hands folded neatly. She looked older, her beauty softened, but her eyes were clearer. "Amira," she said quietly, "I never saw you. Not truly. I thought love meant pushing Logan forward, protecting your father's pride. I thought it meant ignoring you because you seemed safe, silent. I was wrong." Her words startled me. For years, I had waited for recognition, for an apology that never came. And here it was, fragile but real. I nodded, unable to speak. That night, my father told me he respected me. Logan admitted he was grateful, even if he hated how he learned the lesson. These were not grand declarations, not the dramatic apologies of novels. They were small, hesitant, imperfect, but they were enough. I thought of my grandmother then, of her slippers on the wooden floor, of her voice steady and sure. She had known this was possible. She had seen beyond our illusions. She had trusted me to guide us here. And for the first time, I felt the weight of the fortune lift. Not because I had kept it, but because I had earned it. The final test was not written in any document. It was written in the small moments that unfolded after the storm had passed. Months turned into years, and slowly the sharp edges of resentment dulled. My family did not become saints. They stumbled, argued, relapsed into old habits more times than I could count. But they also apologized, tried again, learned. One spring morning, I watched my father fix a broken fence in the modest yard of their smaller house. His hands were calloused, his back bent with age, but there was no bitterness in his movements. When he finished, he looked at me and simply said, "It feels good to build something that lasts." My mother began volunteering at a local library. She arranged shelves, organized events, spoke kindly to children who wandered in after school. Sometimes she still wore bright scarves, but no longer to hide shame. She wore them because she liked the colors. And Logan? Well, Logan surprised me most. He kept his job at the electronics store far longer than I thought possible. Then one day, he came to me with an idea. Not for a startup or a revolution, but for a night class he wanted to teach, basic tech skills for seniors. He laughed nervously, admitting it wasn't glamorous, but he said it made him feel useful. I saw a different light in his eyes that evening, not arrogance, purpose. They were not the same people who once sneered at me. They were smaller, perhaps, but also truer. And I was no longer the girl who needed them to see me. I often returned to the cafe bookstore. I kept the upstairs apartment even though I could afford mansions now. The scent of roasted coffee and old paper reminded me of who I was before the inheritance, before the courtroom, before the reckoning. It reminded me of silence, of invisibility, of how far I had come. One evening, a little girl wandered into the shop with her grandmother. She ran her fingers across the spines of books, eyes wide, curious. When she reached the counter, she looked up at me and asked, "Are you the owner?" I smiled. "Yes, I am," her grandmother chuckled. "She loves books. She wants to write her own one day." I poured her a cup of cocoa and handed her a notebook from the shelf. "Then write," I told her. "Start now." Her face lit up as if I had given her the world. That night, as I closed the shop, I realized something. My grandmother's legacy was not only the fortune, not only the conditions she left behind. It was the belief that silence can hold strength, that patience can reveal truth, that guidance is a form of love. I brewed tea in the quiet, dropping 3 sugar cubes into the cup. The sweetness rose slowly, dissolving into the warmth. I raised the cup to my lips, and for the first time in years, I felt light. The fortune was secure. My family was not perfect, but they were alive, humbled, changed. And I was no longer invisible. I had become exactly who my grandmother believed I could be. As the city lights glowed outside the window, I whispered into the night, not as a plea, but as a promise. The storm is over, and the light remains.